Welcome to the Palmcourt Podcast. Mike Palmer here, joined again by Grant Balfour
Hi.
and Megan Cytron. How are you guys doing?
Hi.
All
Doing
right.
good.
We're excited for this one because we're joined today by Fay Clayton, who is a member of the charter class and is also the mom to Suzanne Clayton, who we attended New College with. Fay, welcome to the Palmcourt Podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here. I only heard about this recently. I think it was from my daughter, Suzanne. So I'm happy you're making connections. So what Mike said, I was in the charter class in 1964, started. I finished in 3 years, which was the standard at that time. And then two other little coincidences. I married while I was in New College and had my kids, including Suzanne, of course. And then that marriage it only lasted 17 years, married again. And the guy I married, Merle Sacknoff, turned out he had a son, which I didn't know when I fell in love with him. He had a son named Scott Sacknoff who had gone to New College, graduating. It was either entering or leaving in 75. And then lo and behold, when my baby daughter grew up and decided to go to college, New College is what she picked too. So I'm a three for at New College.
Yeah. And I do remember, I think it was maybe my first day at New College, I wound up playing tennis
With Suzanne?
with Suzanne. Yeah. So
She became a great, my husband, my second husband, Lowell, was a wonderful tennis player and he just loved playing with her. She was strong. She was good. Also had a lot of other talents, as you know, Mike.
absolutely, absolutely. And I do remember, thank you for your generosity as a mom. I remember you treating us to Italian food at Primo nearby and doing all the great things that a mom can do. But before we do that, we'd love to maybe go back to some of your initial experiences, because I don't think we've had anyone on from the charter class, although we've certainly referenced it and talked about that history. But, you have a long history, but particularly getting there right when things were getting started. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that if you can share.
Sure. I'm certain I'm not the least bit typical, but I think that is probably true of all 101 of us in that
Mm,
first class. I run up on a little farm in New Jersey and was so happy when that flyer came in the mail that said, all I remember of it was be a pioneer. Because I was really ready to leave the farm. I was really ready to broaden my horizons. And it just sounded terrific. I was a good student. I think we all were. They picked people who had done okay in high school, usually from little schools. So it wasn't like we were real competitive, which I think was nice actually. And I was eager to just try my wings and something completely different. And New College was certainly that. I don't think I had any expectation about what college would be like. And I certainly didn't have expectations about New College,
mhm,
except that the materials made very clear each student was going to be responsible for their own education. There was enormous freedom to choose, which really appealed to me. My first career, much later, my first real career as a Montessori teacher, those values I think are so important. Little kids from age 1 or 2 know what they want to do. And if you can encourage that and make the materials and the environment available for them, oh, it's wonderful. And
mhm,
for me, New College was kind of like that. I wanted to try this and that. I think I majored in everything under the sun at one point or another while I was
mm.
at New College, including, I cannot believe, Greek and math, two subjects that I am lousy at. But I found out there are a lot of people who really are good at those things. Why they interested me, I don't know. But I think it was lovely that we could pursue whatever we wanted. And if it didn't work, we would try something different. And by the way, the people were so wonderful. I immediately made a lot of close friends.
It was small too, like you were saying, 101 students, right?
101. They were going to have 100, they were only going to have 100, but this one kid from Utah hitchhiked from Utah. Ted Held was his name. And he said, you made a terrible mistake. You should have let me in. And we said, oh, darn it. Okay, come on. You can take. So we had 101. And I think that was typical New College. Like, why not? Unless it was disrupting something. They were aiming for
Yeah.
100. We had I think it was 33 or 35 teachers. It was a fabulous faculty. Oh, I
Mhm.
was a history major at one point, of course, because Arnold Toynbee was on the faculty.
Oh,
You
wow.
were you majored in a lot of things in 3 years.
Oh,
That's
everybody. Yeah, but sometimes only for 5 minutes. You get into a math class and you're there with Paul Hansmer or Bill Thurston, you pretty quickly figure, even though you were the best in your calculus class in high school, this is not
yes.
really, you're not in the big league.
I had the same experience with Subong Che in my first semester, real analysis. I was like, "Yep, probably not math. I'm gonna land in
Yeah.
social sciences." Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Back at Hightstown High School, I was very good at math, but compared to others at New College, I realized, no, they don't really need me in this field. So I'll
Yeah.
try something different. So Toynbee, of course, was I imagine everybody wanted to do that at one point because he was such a
Mm,
star. He was a really nice man too. He and his
mhm.
wife would have us over to their house for, I
Oh,
don't remember if it was cocktails or white coffee. And it was interesting. I finally settled into psychology, by the way, experimental psychology was in the natural sciences,
Interesting.
not the unnatural sciences, as
Exactly.
David Gorfine called social psychology. Gorfine was wonderful. He was a wild character. He was smart. He just loved the students. He loved the field.
Yeah,
And some of my best friends were the ones I worked with in the experimental psychology lab.
yeah.
Even though I was rodent averse, I had to train a rat to
Right.
in a
And that was this is kinda like the heyday of experimental like, all the interesting research happened in the '60s before folks said you couldn't do that kind of research anymore.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I trained my rat to press the lever. Oh, that was
Well,
rough.
I did see what the title of your thesis was, and I'm curious as to how this connects to what you're talking about. The importance of having a mother, is that
The
correct?
nipple preference in kittens, colon. Oh
Oh,
my god.
yeah,
I said I wasn't a typical new student, but I don't think anybody was.
right.
I was very, coming off the farm, I was the oldest of 5 kids, and I wanted a family. I wanted kids. I wanted to
And
marry.
and just to clarify, Faye, like, you're saying coming off a farm in New Jersey, a lot of us don't necessarily connect farm and New Jersey, although it sounded like John O'Miller had a similar
yeah.
upbringing. Could you
I call it
clarify what
mistake.
you mean by that? Yeah.
Back in the 60s, there was a lot of farmland. It's mostly turned into housing developments now.
Mm, mhm.
My parents' farm was just converted a few years ago, really, maybe 5 years ago. And you could see the farm from exit 8A on the turnpike, by the way.
Oh, sure. Right by Princeton then, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, it's halfway between Princeton and New Brunswick. It was
Yep.
all farming area. I went to a rural high school where we had to ride a bus almost an hour to school
Mm.
because it would pick up all the kids at all these farms. In Monroe Township,
What kind of farm?
my grandparents had mostly potatoes. That was the staple, the community potatoes. I had the sacks from their potato bags framed on my wall in my law office for many years. In fact, I still have it around, but I've moved to a smaller home. The grandparents had potatoes, and of course, they had cows and pigs. Oh, and chickens. I love the chicken. And probably some other crops that I can't remember.
Yeah.
My dad and mother bought a little piece of land across the road from the family farm, and it was too small to really make a living on. But my uncle, who farmed the family farm, farmed our little 40 acres, and we had wheat and soybeans. And
Mm.
then my dad worked at a dairy farm up the road. So it really was farm country. It isn't anymore. Yeah, my parents thought it was so good to get all that fresh country air. I wanted to go to New York City. I just needed the city.
Yeah,
And I escaped into the city by bus or train or whatever, whenever I could with
sure.
one of my
Yeah.
friends from the country.
But then pulled up stakes and landed in Sarasota.
Well, that's because you could be a pioneer there, and
Yeah.
it sounded so exciting. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, it could have been on the moon, and I probably would have said yes. Never been south of Washington D.C. or west of Philadelphia. Going to Sarasota I didn't visit it before I said yes.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
wow.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I just wanted to go. I had to get away. I wanted
Yeah.
to get away.
I mean, it was also a time where there was more pioneering happening. This is heading into the space age and like a lot of the, reinventing of what's possible was starting to happen. This is like early '60s.
Yeah.
And then the campus wasn't even what it is today when you first started. Is that right?
That's right, and they didn't have any dorms for us at first, but one of
Mhm.
the hotels on Lido Beach gave them a deal where we could stay in the Landmark Hotel. What a deal. I mean, it was gorgeous. It was one of the premier hotels. The problem was we couldn't stay after when the tourist season started, and the dorms IM Pei was building those dorms,
Right.
and we couldn't stay after December, whatever, 1st. And so they had to move us. And some people thought this was horrible, but I kind of got a kick out of it, having grown up on a farm with a lot of siblings. They put the women in the science lab. It's where the science lab, I guess the science lab is still there. So
Mhm.
50 of us were bunked, and we had these little cots and I don't remember, I think we had a dresser. And, it was just crammed in. I think there were 3 or 4 showers. I got to recognize every woman in the class by her feet. I knew everyone by their feet under the shower door. And it didn't bother me at all. I mean, some people really hated that, but I hadn't had a lot of personal space and freedom growing up, so I
Mhm.
wasn't spoiled. And then the dorms got done. Oh, and the men, of course, were in the barn. I don't know if they still call it
Yeah.
the barn.
Yeah.
And then the dorms were done, and oh my God, those were beautiful,
It
except they were
really
impractical. I am
right. But
pay
you were
was
there
real.
for like the ribbon cutting, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it was all
exactly.
wow.
Exactly. And they were goofy in that IMP didn't realize wool carpet was not a good idea in Sarasota climate. And the furniture was also, it was misshaped. I mean, I'm kind of normal height for a woman. The desks were like up to my
Yeah.
nose. It was just not, he was not good at furniture, although I did love the design of those buildings and
Yeah.
the little units, two people in a room. It was
Right.
really fabulous.
I was going to say it must have been strange to come back in the late 80s and see the decline. Very lived in by then, right?
Yeah. I'd been back for some reunions and I'd also served on the New College Foundation board for a while. It was probably in let's see, the 80s, somewhere in the 80s I went on and I served on that board for a number of years. So I would go back for board meetings and see some of the changes. It was tragic how the state they stopped investing in the campus after a while. The funniest thing, they have all this money to bribe ball players to come and live in luxury, but they didn't
Right.
have money to keep those glorious architecturally significant dorms in good shape. They needed upkeep and they weren't being given it. The foundation raised money for a lot of things, but it wasn't enough.
Right. The name of this podcast is the Palm Court Podcast.
That's
And
right.
Palm Court is very central to the pay dorms. And,
That's
going from Lido Beach to then a communal experience to then, you know, interestingly, a number of conversations have talked about how the architecture and like the design of those dorms kind of fostered a sense of both, independent individual space, but then also a lot of communal gathering
Community.
spaces. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's wonderful. We didn't have what they called the walls. I think they called the inside
Ah.
dance party. We didn't have that. When Suzanne was there, I think you had them.
Oh, yeah.
But we would just hang out. I mean, that's where you'd just sit there and study. Some people would play frisbee, or that was our sports department. We had frisbee and a couple sailboats. Yeah, they were just places where it was good communal. You'd come from your little room to go to get your new sheets from the laundry room, and you'd bump into people and stop in their room for coffee or whatever. That's how Sharon and I got to be good buddies. We were psych majors together, and she had always had a coffee pot going, and we'd just hang out and talk about the great themes of life. She's still a dear friend. I loved seeing her and her husband when I was in Sarasota in May. She's
Yeah.
really a prominent researcher, in brain research and so forth. You should have her on your program.
We love any connections into the charter class. I think we've likened y'all to The Right Stuff, the movie where
Yeah.
like you guys were kind of the
The Titan.
the people who were going to change the world, and in many cases you did. I mean, Montessori, and then you just mentioned briefly your law practice, but can you try to capture a little bit of your professional history?
Sure. Well, my first wish was to have kids, get married, have kids, which I did. I married right in school, and I didn't even wait for graduation. I left my first husband. He had to join the Air Force. It was Vietnam. And he had been stationed to Turkey, in Ankara, Turkey.
Wow.
And so I handed in my thesis, that wonderful thesis on nipple preference in kittens, which amazingly they let me graduate on. And I headed to Turkey, where Kim was born like within a year. And we were there a couple of years and came back.
Were you married on campus?
I didn't get married on campus, but I got married just before I started my second year back up at the farm. The husband was a little older. Yeah, he had finished college. He was from Princeton.
Okay.
Yeah. So then we came back to Chicago, where my first husband, Alan, he had been accepted at the University of Chicago to study economics. And I didn't really want to go, but I didn't have any other choices, being a dutiful wife at the time.
It was the 60s still, yeah.
It was the 60s, women's movement. I didn't know the women's movement had started. But so we moved there and I fell in love with Chicago when I saw it had an ocean. They call it Lake Michigan, but it's as good as any ocean I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So I was just so happy when I saw what it was. So we settled on the South Side, and then pretty soon we had 3 kids. And about that time, I discovered the women's movement was going on. So becoming a feminist, I knew I could do whatever I really wanted to do. I didn't have to just be a good little wifey to here in Chicago. I was working like as a receptionist at the hospital or something to make a little money, because my husband was in graduate school and we had a couple kids by then.
Yeah.
And I guess 3 pretty soon. And so I did what I really, really wanted to do, which was become a Montessori teacher. That was my feminism. I trained to be a Montessori teacher, and it was fabulous.
Just to jump in, I don't know if you know, I have a 5-year-old. He's in first grade. You're speaking my language, and the connection between New College as almost an adult version of Montessori, I think, is a sharp one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for absorbent minds. Minds are all absorbent when they're little.
Yeah.
In fact, I took this little preschool that had been like a play school. It really wasn't much. It was for 4 and 5-year-olds. And when they hired me, I said, "Oh, you really ought to add 2 and 3-year-olds." They let me add the 3-year-olds, and then finally two,
Mm,
because their minds are so absorbent, and it's so,
yeah.
and the 2-year-olds are good for the 5-year-olds because it gives the 5-year-olds a chance to teach. And I just love being like an orchestra conductor of the 28 little toddlers in my class. I loved it. I
Wow.
loved it. I loved it.
Yeah.
So I did that for Suzanne was 2. I guess she was around 2 when or 1, maybe she was 1 when I started my training. And then
Yeah.
she was 2 and they enrolled her at the school where I
Oh,
was
very
training.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So she had the Montessori background and her sisters did too. And then I was teaching and really enjoying it there on in South Shore, but I was getting a little bit bored and I was noticing the news. I noticed that the Supreme Court was making a difference in people's lives.
Mm,
This
mm.
was 1974, I guess. And I wanted to just learn a little bit about law. And I found out you can't just take a couple classes in law. You've got to enroll full time or part time. And so I said, well, what the hell? I'll just enroll part time. So I did. I applied to the best night school. And of course, I was still teaching
Yeah.
and started there. I thought I was just gonna learn it or maybe practice a little law while doing Montessori teaching. But I got booked. By the time I graduated in 78, I was very excited about the career and had found I'd worked at it was really the best firm in the city the prior summer.
Mm,
And when they made me an offer, there was just no question that that's what I was going to do and be a litigator because litigating cases, I'd never debated or done anything like that, but the law makes big impacts on people. Roe v. Wade had just been decided.
right.
There were a few other big cases that made a difference. One of my children's interracial, and I was
Mm,
very aware of the civil
Clothing.
rights rules, the
Yeah.
laws that made equality possible. Oh, yeah, I forgot to say, when I went down to New College in 64, I was astonished. It was my first time seeing the colored and white signs, which of
right.
Oh, they had
course
that in Sarasota?
they absolutely did, but it
Oh,
wasn't
wow.
legal. It wasn't legal to discriminate.
Yeah.
But they still had the signs. And in fact,
Mhm.
some of us would go out I remember we'd go out at night and paint over, like a little bit of vandalism, paint over the colored and white signs at the gas stations or wherever it
Yeah.
was. A few of us did that.
Little
That was,
good trouble. Good trouble
yeah,
never hurt
good job. Yeah,
anybody.
John
Yeah.
Lewis would have approved.
Yeah.
But I was appalled to see this was, how rampant it was. One of the things we did either the first or second year was tutor the kids who were the youngsters who were being allowed to go to the integrated school. There had
Mm,
been an all black school and an all white school. And that was the year it changed. And the kids who had been in the all black school and wanted some like head start could sign up. And I had 2 teams, as we called them, lovely, lovely kids. Their parents were courageous to let them go
Yeah.
to this integrated school
yeah.
in that otherwise formerly very segregated city. So
Oh, yeah.
that was like an awakening about what
Sure.
the world was really like in terms of civil rights. Because where
Yeah.
I grew up, in the country, it didn't matter what color you were. We didn't have a huge number of blacks in the country, although my best friend was a black girl whose
Mm,
family's farm was not too far from mine.
yeah.
And in the high school I went to, it was an amalgam of all these districts. So we had a pretty good mix of everything.
Right. But it's interesting. I mean, like even politically, folks are talking about the difference between rural and urban. It sounds like it might have been a little more that was really your kind of root metaphor there, growing up in a farm and like and then having exposure to the city, but then being kind of beamed into Star Trek kind of in the time there is beamed into Sarasota. That must have been kind of eye-opening, I guess, culturally. And then from there back to Chicago. And then how about quite a career then as a litigator and in law, correct?
Yeah, and I was, so I practiced law for what I was at 40 years or something before I
Yeah.
retired. It was I chose that fabulous firm that let me really was the best firm in the city. It was small-ish, but the organizations like ACLU and Anti-Defamation League and a whole lot of others, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, asked this firm to handle important cases. And so I got to work on those very early on. During the summer, when I worked at the firm, they were doing the pro bono, an amicus brief on an appeal for Fred Hampton, the Black Panther leader who was
Hmm.
absolutely murdered by the cops. His family and friends were, all the bullets went in, none came out. So we had a case for civil damages for the family.
Hmm.
And so that was when I worked on a case for mental patients whose Social Security benefits were being taken by the state illegally and when they should have
Mhm.
gone to their family member before they go to the state. That was my
Right.
first federal court of appeals argument. So
Wow.
by doing pro bono cases, because I didn't care if I ever made partner, by doing all these, anytime there was a pro bono case, I'd raise my hand and say, oh, I'd like to do it. And people said, Fay, you'll never make partner if you keep doing pro bono stuff. I don't care. It's
Yeah.
what I want to do.
Right.
And of course, I got so much experience that I was head and shoulders above the guys who'd come from Harvard and Chicago and Cornell and other places who had taken a more traditional route
Right.
to making partner. So
Mhm.
it worked. It was just fabulous for me. And this firm it was really true to its promise that I could do the kind of important cases I wanted to work on. I think I had just made partner a couple of years before the Now versus Scheidler case was filed by the Southern Poverty Law Center to stop the terrorists from attacking clinics that offered abortion. At that
Right.
time, they were not only blockading, they were gluing the lock, they were firebombing, they were
Right.
doing a host of other violent and enforceable activities.
Yeah.
And Morris Dees had been brought in by the National Organization for Women, which I had been a member of. Since it started, I had paid my $5 or whatever it was. And he brought that case. I was reading about it in my Now Times or whatever they called it. And he brought it as an antitrust case. And in this firm, which did a lot of antitrust work, by the way, and I had worked on a bunch of antitrust cases in addition to the pro bono stuff, which doesn't
Mm.
pay the rent. And so I knew a lot about antitrust. And I called up and they said, hey, I happen to know some of this. Can I help? And one thing led to another. And I ended up being, when Morris Dees moved on to something else many years later, the National Organization for Women put me in
Mm.
charge of that case to do
Wow.
it for free, of course, which was wonderful. I loved it. We took that to the Supreme Court where we got the right to go to trial. And then we won the trial. And then there were more. We also testified in Congress to get a better law. We were using RICO, the racketeering.
Right.
Right.
It was a unanimous decision, wasn't it?
The first time I argued there, it was a unanimous decision, and people said, "Hooray, you won!" And I said, and "Don't forget, what I won was the right to go to trial."
Yeah.
Right.
So we had to go back and do all the discovery, and it was, I mean, the case really took like 26, 27 years or something
Mm.
altogether. But we did the trial, and a funny story there was one man who was from New York, a lawyer from New York, who was going to try it with me. We were all doing it pro bono. I don't know if he was being paid by the clinics. He was a lawyer for the clinics. And I was representing Now and its members, women who might want to use these facilities, whether it was for an abortion or cancer screening or any of the other many services they provide. And just before trial, like a month before trial, this other lawyer had to bow out for reasons I won't go into. And all of a sudden I'm looking at, well, I knew it would be it was a 3-month trial for free, right? For free. And so I had to find somebody who I could really, really trust, somebody who was really, really good, somebody who was really, really committed and generous. So of course I looked across my pillow and found my second husband.
There you go.
And Lowell tried it. Of course, when I asked him, he stepped in and he was just wonderful. We tried that case together for those 3 months and we won the jury trial. After that, there were some more appeals up to the Supreme Court, and we'd gotten the law that's now in effect. It's a wonderful law. It's called Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances.
Mm.
And that makes it much easier if any act of violence or force is used against people trying to use a facility that offers abortion, or a church, by the way. You know, they put up fine. You shouldn't use violence or force against people trying to go to church either. You have it's very easy to prove, and they're big damages, and you don't have to wait for the government to prosecute. There's a private right of action, which was very, very important. So that law had come in, and by the time we went up to the Supreme Court, we had an injunction in place against all this terrorism for 10 years. And by the time the defendants appealed up to the Supreme Court again, and this time even Ruth Bader Ginsburg went against me saying, "Hey, don't you have enough with that FACE Act? You really need RICO. We all need RICO." So we didn't win the second time, but we had the injunction in place for 10 years. We had stopped that pattern. I hope it doesn't come back. But right now, the FACE law is a very easy way to remedy it when any act of violence or force is used against a clinic that offers abortion. So I feel really good about what we accomplished and working with the most wonderful people in the world. Can't tell you all. I guess it was after I won it let me think now. Oh, it was after I won the first Supreme Court round that they asked me to speak at the new college graduation. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was,
Yeah.
that just happened to be the year Suzanne was graduating.
Oh, that's
Oh.
awesome.
I think, or maybe or maybe we waited a year.
Wow. Yeah. So, one of the reasons why I love doing this show is I get to thank people for their service. So thank you for all of that. That's a lot. And sounds like you have your own podcast that we could go into more depth on. All of that is a whole nother thing. But, pivoting, I guess, to new college and even what you were kind of intimating there, the struggle is clearly not over and forces move in different directions. And, since January of 2023, we have certainly been made aware of the fact that new college is not free and clear of the culture wars that are really besieging our culture nowadays. How are you managing that? How do you think about all that? Any thoughts you want to share?
My first reaction was, of course, let's fight it. I was excited that people were going to raise the point that it's a state college and you can't force religion, which they seem to be doing, and you can't, I mean, you're subject to a whole lot of laws under the US Constitution. I don't know where those go. And I wasn't eager to get into that battle. I
Yeah.
hadn't been super close to the college for a while there. I'd been off the board for more than a decade. And so I think I was trying to distance myself. And a lot of us said, well, we're so glad we got it while it was there. The one thing that was maybe disturbing is that the enrollment always stayed kind of low. I think it might have been because the state wasn't putting the proper resources into it. Now, with the gajillions of dollars that Ron DeSantis is pouring there, you could have really made it something special. Our class was, I think we had more like PhDs, more Rhodes Scholars, more this and that. It was just a real gem for Florida.
Yeah.
Florida was
Yeah.
appropriately proud of it.
Right.
But when they stopped investing, and I'm not sure whether that was before DeSantis or what.
It was.
So I must say I haven't been super close to the ground on it. And when I went back in May, I did talk with some of the students there, although that was not my goal, because I knew it was sort of like going to a funeral, for
Right.
college. You see all these fancy things, but not the education. And they were taking down what was it called? The gender office. And
Right.
we chatted with people, and there's still a lot of really, really good people there. And some who thought this is not the college they thought it was going to.
Right.
I didn't talk to any of the jocks who were surprised that there wasn't even a ball field, but they had a different kind of deception hoisted on them.
Yeah.
So, I love the place. It was wonderful for me. It was wonderful for my stepson, for my daughter. And I have so many good friends. I mean, not a lot, a solid handful of dear, dear friends. I'm really grateful for it. It's tragic what that current governor is doing to dismantle it just because he doesn't want to be woke. I don't even know what that means.
Right.
Because what we did, New College taught us, and I think it was still doing it, teaching people to explore and learning how to learn and not being fed pablum. Nobody would do that. Nobody wanted that. I don't know what they're doing with the curriculum now, but it's what I read about. There was something in the Guardian the other day that was
Yes.
very
About
Yeah,
the
that
woke
was
ISP.
Andrew
Yeah.
Doyle.
like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I think it's interesting. Go ahead and try to indoctrinate people. It'll probably be like those snake oil salesmen that
Yeah.
people will say, but excuse me, what makes you think that really works? Why is this a good idea? Show me some evidence.
Yeah.
The basis and reality of New College was so important. We would go out and we'd question everything. There was
Right.
nothing was off limits.
Hmm.
You could question why the sky is blue or whether the sky is up or
Right.
it's really down. You could question anything.
Yeah. Well, it kind of reminds me, I was recently talking to someone about the space program and kind of bringing it back to that, where, the Apollo program ended with some real catastrophic results. And maybe the experiment, because New College, even when we were there in the 80s and 90s, and I think even to this day, it always kind of felt like an experiment. It didn't necessarily feel like it was going to last forever, which is why taking advantage of that opportunity when we did was really what we can hold on to. But I wonder what your thoughts are about like how this type of experiment may move forward. Montessori for adults, is another angle on this. But let's say even if politically Florida stays such that it is, and the actual prognosis for the Sarasota campus is whatever it might be, are there some maybe positive direction that the energy and the great outcomes of folks like yourself and others, lessons we might be able to learn and ways to think about the future based on what we experienced?
Oh, I think so. I'm a true believer in the absorbent mind, and I think you're like that when you're two, but you're also like that when you're leaving your parents' home, or at
Mhm.
least you could be. Now, some
Mhm.
people want to stay in that cocoon, and fine. And I'm not suggesting new colleges for everybody. By the way, one of the things we found in the first year was that there were some students who, given the freedoms, found that they weren't studying anything. They were kind of goofing off. I don't know what they
Yeah.
were doing because I was studying.
That totally went away by the time I was there. Faye.
Oh yeah,
Like
that never
everybody
happened.
was
Yeah.
just 100% focused on our studies.
Yeah. With a little dance party every now and then.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, about almost half our class transferred
Yeah.
before they graduated. I think some of them were just afraid they wouldn't get into the good graduate schools, although we really did. The
Yeah.
amazing thing was when we applied places, this is not true of me, of course, because I didn't take that route, but my friends who applied to the top schools, they all got in. I mean, this is special. You've already been to grad school. You've
Yeah.
written your own, you've come up with your own independent study project and you've fulfilled it. You've come up with written a thesis, even if it is on nipple preference in kittens, Megan.
Cats got to eat, Faye. Yeah.
Me too. And my hat's off to my wonderful roommate, Anna Navarro, who tolerated that
Oh,
because
yeah.
when the
my God.
automatic machine that I made to feed the kittens, when it leaked, and I had to set the alarm to wake up every 2 hours for the first 2 months. Poor Anna.
I've
You
had to
guys
do
who put
that.
up
Yeah.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
For science. For
for
science.
science, and to graduate. But I think it's a wonderful model. I think it's I think it is the model. I mean, you could go through high school style classes where they make you memorize the exports of Venezuela and the imports of Chile. I mean, who cares? Does that take you anywhere? I was so amazed to find that in college that we'd be given facts, we taught how to research stuff or whatever it was. And then we'd be on our own. You'd find books and original material. I love the story, by the way, of one of our alums who was formerly known as Derek Black.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I heard that individual speak recently here in Skokie at the Holocaust Museum. Wonderful,
Ah.
wonderful, brilliant speaker and lovely human being. But anyway, the story about discovering the truth about certain things where you've been
Indoctrinated or
Thank you. That's
Sheltered.
it. Indoctrinated. Thanks,
Okay.
Megan. Yeah. Indoctrinated. And there's no such thing as the Holocaust. It was fake. And then as this author, our fellow alum said, there's all these original materials. There's all this evidence. You can't
Right.
deny it. I mean, you can lie, of course, and people do, but
The power of New College satyrs was certainly reflected there, by the way.
who would think satyrs would be important and powerful? I wouldn't, but they were. I think the openness to each other, the fact that we were all different. We didn't have as much racial diversity as they were trying to get because kids who were self-starters and Black were being given such generous packages at Harvard, and it was so
Sure.
much safer for them if they were the first generation college students. But still, there was as much diversity as you could get, and we were almost like two from every state. Actually,
Yeah.
it wasn't quite like Noah's Ark, but it was pretty close. And I think it's a wonderful model being thrown into a mixture of people who are very different from yourself. I'd never really hung out with super wealthy people, and they didn't act like super wealthy people. I
Yeah.
didn't even know who was wealthy
Yeah.
until later on somebody might tell me, oh, this one has a trust fund. Really? They seem regular to me.
And was it because it got the reputation as being like a hippie school, but I feel like this is almost pre-hippie. I'd be curious just culturally, like what that experience was like 64 to 67 you're talking about?
Yeah. And, I was so green. I was from the farm. I didn't know hippie. I didn't know
Right.
hippie stuff. And by the way, there were no televisions. And I don't even remember how I learned being in that milieu. No, I think hippie came a little later. And there were some drugs on campus, but not many because it was far enough off the beaten tracks that, I was exposed in the sense of I was offered, but it wasn't
Yeah.
like I didn't even try it back then. It was another couple of years before and it was a new college friend brought me some
Sure. I mean,
good stuff.
late 60s and the 70s was a cultural experience. Yeah.
You know,
Well, how was it for women there, Faye? Did you feel that there was equality, or did you feel like you had the same opportunities?
I did. And here's the funny thing, but I know it wasn't true for everybody. I have one very, very dear friend who I'm not going to mention, where the professor in charge of the department expected more and gave more opportunity to the man she ended up marrying, who was a fellow student, than to her. So she definitely felt that. For me, you have to remember, I was aspiring to be a housewife. In fact, they did an interest inventory to see if, would you rather fight a forest fire or knit a blanket or something. I came out housewife, and the testing guy, that's his name, John French from ETS, was very concerned about that. And I said, well, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that was what I wanted to do. And is that going to hurt anybody? I think I needed to do it. If I hadn't done that, I would have had an unfulfilled yearning, a huge unfulfilled yearning. And then when that didn't quite make me as fulfilled as I thought I might be, and I was still a little bored, there was room for other things. But I so loved being, I'm not going to say being a wife. Being a wife was crappy. And in fact, I had to change my name when I got married because that was
Mm.
Florida law.
Oh,
Clayton.
yeah.
Listen.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah,
Well, this
yeah,
is before you could get your own bank account, right? I mean,
oh yes,
Credit
and that
card,
was
yeah.
another thing. Oh, that made me so angry because I was the one earning the money for the family.
right,
My
right.
first husband was in grad school. He never worked for the
Mhm.
longest time.
Yeah.
No, I was the wage earner. So that made me furious. I took my name back as soon as I was able to do it for free because I didn't have any money, of course. So there was that in the society in general, and I didn't notice it in my studies. I felt like my teachers they were actually trying to get me to be more professional, to go, really ought to go for a PhD. Oh, no, I just want to have babies. And by the way, I did get a PhD finally from IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, an honorary one they gave me
Yeah.
a few years ago.
Hey.
So I did get that PhD.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
Basic-
Housewives Supreme Court PhD.
Don't forget Montessori teacher.
Montessori.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Well,
Uh-huh.
Montessori teacher. Sorry, housewife. Montessori teacher to Supreme Court. I mean, that's a obvious
Yeah.
connection there.
It is. It's very natural.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a sort of, I really think that when you have a passion to do something, and I do, I don't know if some people lack a passion and they just want to have someone tell them what to do. I'm told that there are people who want to be told what to do. I can't
Yeah.
quite imagine that, but if they do, fine. It's not me, and it wasn't the new college people that I
Oh,
knew.
they probably didn't go to a Montessori pre-K program, which kind of encourage you to follow your passions, follow your curiosity, which is clearly something that's borne fruit really for you throughout your life.
Right. That's when you learn best. If you have a curiosity, a passion, an interest, then like all your antenna are out. You're going to
Mhm.
pick up stuff. If you're just slugging through to memorize the stuff and pass the class, that's stupid. And New College never did that, except I guess in some of those, we had that core curriculum where you had to pass some. It was kind of rinky dink. It was really simple for the average person. But my friend Ray Bennett couldn't pass the music test. I think he couldn't tell Beethoven from the Beatles. I may have this wrong, but there was somebody who was like that. He couldn't pass the most basic music thing. And then there was a brilliant poet maybe who couldn't add 3+3 or whatever.
Yeah.
But they had that requirement for a little bit where you had to pass some very, very basic level of competence in almost everything. I don't remember it being a problem.
We've talked about that actually, because I think by the time we were there in the anno-me of the late 80s into the early 90s, there was like as little rigor as ever. And again, maybe it's cognitive dissonance or whatever, but like I still really appreciate that, where like just kind of like the radical freedom that, again, maybe made it feel more like an experiment, and experiments don't always succeed. Nelson Mandela famously said, "I never lose, I either win or learn."
I love that.
That's kind of where we are now, I guess, where, hopefully there is some rally down there, but, we're getting closer to time here, Faye, and it's been wonderful having you. We could certainly keep going, but just be respectful of time and maybe thinking of our audience. You're someone who's done summations in front of the Supreme Court, so no pressure. But any wrap up concluding thoughts as we're getting closer to concluding here?
Well, I'm just going to say it's been nice being with all three of you and spending this time because New College was so important to me. And I know it was important to a lot of other people, including two related to me. And I'm glad it was there. I don't have any prediction for the future, but I've never been a prognosticator. I continue to be open to sharing with New College people. And even though I don't have that big old house on the lake where everybody used to know they could come and stay for as long as they wanted, I still got an extra bedroom and it's only 2 blocks away.
There
Still
you
near
go.
the lake in Evanston, Illinois. So I welcome contact. I think it's an important history. I hope other institutions can learn from it
Yeah.
because I think it was I didn't think of it as an experiment like you did, Mike, but it was. And I'm awfully glad I was one of the lab subjects.
You were like one of your kittens.
Yeah,
I
one of the
guess.
kittens.
Who knew?
Yeah.
Faye, thank you so much for joining
Thanks,
us on
Mike.
today's show.
Thanks for connecting with me. It's been fun.
And thanks to our listeners for joining us. This is the Balfour Podcast. We'll be back again soon.